The Forgotten Ancestry of African Americans, a revealing tale. Many African Americans believe their ancestry is primarily rooted in Africa, with some lineage traced back to Native American tribes and Europe. Genetic studies often support this, showing that African Americans have an average of 73.2% African DNA, 24% European DNA, and 0.8% Native American DNA. This has led to the widespread belief that the majority are descendants of African slaves. However, this narrative might be more complex than it seems. Research suggests that about 98% of African Americans have Native American ancestry. This raises the question, why is this aspect of their heritage often overlooked? Historical accounts reveal that before Christopher Columbus arrived in America, tens of millions of native Black Americans, or Indians, lived there. After 1492, many of these indigenous people were forcibly relocated to Europe and Africa as slaves. This reversal of the commonly told slave trade story suggests that rather than a large influx of Africans to America, many native Black Indians were taken from America to Europe and then to Africa before being brought back to America and misidentified as African slaves. This critical part of history is frequently omitted from educational curricula. European colonizers exploited Indian slaves for construction, plantations, and mining, often shipping them to the Caribbean and Europe. For instance, South Carolina's historical records from 1650 to 1730 indicate that at least 50,000 Indians were exported to the Caribbean. These numbers likely underreport the true scale, as many shipments were hidden to avoid taxes. Between 1670 and 1717, more Native Americans were exported as slaves than Africans were imported. Slavery, disease, and warfare decimated entire tribes in the southern coastal regions. In 1704, a law conscripted Indian slaves to fight in colonial wars. Displaced by the fur trade in the north, Indians migrated south, where plantation owners armed them to capture slaves living in Spanish mission communities. European powers manipulated the slave trade for their benefit, offering freedom in exchange for peace and military alliances. The British, for example, allied with the Chickasaw in Georgia, who conducted slave raids in the lower Mississippi Valley to weaken French influence. The Indian slave trade stretched from Spanish New Mexico to the Great Lakes. Every tribe in this vast region was involved, either as captives or traders. Slavery was a strategy to depopulate land for European settlers. Ports like Boston, Salem, Mobile, and New Orleans were major hubs for shipping Indian slaves to places like Barbados, Martinique, and the Bahamas. These slaves often escaped or died from European diseases, leading to a ban on Indian slavery in Barbados by 1676. As the Indian slave trade waned and the African slave trade rose in the late 1700s, Native American women began marrying imported Africans, producing mixed-race offspring. These individuals' native identities became obscured over time. Colonial efforts aimed to erase Indian presence, reclassifying mixed-race individuals as colored in public records. Census takers often recorded them as Black based on appearance, further obscuring their true heritage. Today, many African Americans with Native American ancestry are not recognized as such. This situation mirrors that of the freedmen of the Cherokee and other 5 civilized tribes documented by the United States on the Dawes Rolls. In September 2015, Native American tribes won a historic settlement of $940 million against the U.S. Department of Justice, highlighting ongoing issues related to their recognition and rights. This complex history challenges the simplified narrative of African American ancestry, revealing a rich tapestry of Native American roots intertwined with African heritage. More Native Americans, often mislabeled as colored, Negro, Black, or left blank on their birth certificates, are uncovering their true history and heritage. This discovery could pressure the government into granting them reparations and land. To circumvent this, the U.S. quietly set a December 31, 2014 deadline for these individuals to make land and identity claims. Despite the deadline, thousands of Native Americans are still securing settlements through the U.S. Supreme Court and the United Nations courts. But where did these Black Native Americans originate? It's now recognized that many Black people in America today have Native Black American ancestors. Yet, we must understand who these Native Black Americans are. Dr. David Imhotep, a distinguished historian and the first to earn a PhD in ancient African ancestry, provides a revolutionary perspective on human origins. He asserts that all humans, including Americans, trace their roots back to Africa. This view challenges traditional American historical narratives, which often begin with cowboys and Indians. According to Dr. Imhotep, these accounts overlook a much earlier and significant chapter of American history, the presence and influence of Africans in ancient America. In his influential book, They Came Before Columbus, historian Ivan van Sertima explores various evidence supporting the idea of an African presence in the New World long before Columbus's arrival. Van Sertima examines aspects like sophisticated navigation and shipbuilding techniques of ancient Africans, which could have enabled transatlantic voyages. He also draws cultural parallels between Native Americans and Africans, highlighting similarities in art, language, and religious practices that suggest historical connections. Additionally, he discusses the transportation of plants, animals, and textiles between the continents, indicating contact between Africa and the Americas. He cites diaries, journals, and oral accounts of explorers referencing African peoples and their influence in the New World. Several historical accounts support Van Sertima's thesis. One notable example is the fleet launched by the Mali Empire in 1310, comprising 200 master boats and 200 supply boats, showcasing the advanced seafaring capabilities of West African civilizations. Another is the sea expedition led by the Mandingo king in 1311, further demonstrating intentional exploration efforts by African leaders. The presence and impact of Black Africans in pre-Columbian America are evident in the cultural and technological imprints they left on the civilizations they encountered. In his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Dr. Imhotep expands on these themes, advocating for a radical reevaluation of traditional history. He emphasizes the importance of scientific and geological evidence in tracing the early presence of African peoples in the Americas. This evidence includes genetic studies, ancient artifacts, and geological findings suggesting that Africans were present in both North and South America long before the Vikings or Columbus. One striking piece of evidence highlighted by Dr. Imhotep is a photograph from the HMS Challenger expedition, 1872 to 1876, displayed at the Natural History Museum of London, showing African explorers in Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost region of South America. This image is a tangible reminder of the historical presence of Africans in the Americas, supporting Dr. Imhotep's arguments. Ultimately, this suggests that the identity of Black people is too diverse to fit into a single label. They are Afro-Indigenous, Black Native, Indigenous, and Black, or Black with a tribal identity. By honoring both heritages, Black people challenge America's tradition of categorizing individuals into distinct racial groups. They resist societal pressure to choose between their identities based on appearance or perceived authenticity, blending their Black and Native identities by using traditional language or developing new expressions that reflect their unique heritage. Since the first contact between Africans and Native peoples, Black and Indigenous ancestors have built communities, formed relationships, and fought against oppressive systems. Despite the hardships, Black and Native peoples have never been conquered, finding ways to resist oppression and creating modes of defiance such as abolition, free towns, cross-cultural alliances, kinship ties, and community building. They have pushed for freedom individually and in solidarity, birthing enduring movements of resistance. What do you think? Are Black Americans descendants of African slaves, or Native American Black people? Why do you think the true ancestry of Black Americans is hidden? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you had your DNA tested to know the percentage of Native Black